Howdy book lovers, I'm Anita. Welcome back to another Weird Girl Wednesday. Today we're talking about why Shirley Jackson is the greatest writer of all time. That's right, that's what I said. Shirley Jackson is the GOAT. Not the greatest horror writer, not the greatest female writer, but flat out the greatest writer. Hold up there, Anita, I hear you say. Shirley, you must be joking. What about Shakespeare? What about Austen or Tolkien or Murakami or Toni Morrison? And to that I would say fair point and whatever floats your boat. But secretly I would be thinking you are wrong, and here's why. Shirley Jackson understood people. She understood the horror of being human and also the horror of being in a world full of other humans. She understood that horror is never really about monsters, it's about people. One of Shirley Jackson's greatest gifts is the way she can make completely ordinary situations feel unsettling. Dinner tables, neighbours, polite conversations, small towns, all these things become terrifying in her hands because she understood that what makes something terrifying is when the familiar becomes hostile, when the spaces that are supposed to be safe just aren't. In The Lottery, the story begins in bright sunshine with villagers chatting casually while the children gather stones. Nothing seems overtly frightening, but the atmosphere feels wrong almost immediately. That emotional dissonance creates dread before the reader consciously understands why. The horror isn't the violence itself, it's the normality surrounding it, the casualness, the social ritual, the fact that everyone participates because everyone else does. Nobody questions anything because the preservation of social order matters more than morality. Jackson constantly places comfort beside danger, domesticity beside violence, beauty beside decay, and politeness beside cruelty. And because these are recognisable everyday situations, the horror feels disturbingly plausible. Books and Cats has some really great video essays on Shirley Jackson and domestic horror, so if you want to take a deep dive into it, I'll hook you up in the description. Shirley Jackson's horror comes from social systems and the expectations that come with them. The fear in her books is often the fear of failing to belong correctly. The characters often feel emotionally disconnected from the outside world in this really profound way. And that creates this constant low-level dread underneath everything. It's not dramatic terror, it's just a quiet terror. And she didn't just understand people in general, but she understood women in particular. And not women as symbols or archetypes, but actual women. Women who are strange and angry and lonely, women who feel fundamentally disconnected from the world around them. Long before contemporary fiction became full of socially alienated women spiralling psychologically inside beautiful prose, Shirley Jackson was already writing characters who felt detached from reality and detached from themselves. Women who retreat inward because the outside world feels hostile or incomprehensible. Characters who become consumed by rituals or routines or obsessions because those things feel safer than other people. Characters who are childish and cruel and funny and vulnerable and unsettling all at the same time. And it's not just that she understood people, it's that she's able to convey them so honestly. She never flattens her characters into a lesson or a diagnosis, she just lets them exist. Part of why Shirley Jackson's work feels so psychologically overwhelming is because she doesn't just describe dread, she creates it structurally within the narrative. The fear becomes embedded in the architecture of the writing itself. One of the biggest techniques she uses is repetition. She repeats phrases, routines, images, thoughts, physical spaces until they become emotionally oppressive. In We've Always Lived in the Castle, Mary Cat constantly performs repetitive rituals like burying objects, nailing books to trees, hiding silver dollars, performing these little magical routines to keep the world stable. And at first these rituals feel whimsical, but gradually they become unsettling because you realise they're her attempts to control a world that she just can't connect with. Shirley Jackson repeats imagery constantly too, like the house, food, the path to the village, locked spaces, buried objects, the moon, everything circles back in on itself. And it creates this closed emotional system where the characters are psychologically trapped long before they're physically trapped. In The Haunting of Hill House, Eleanor repeats phrases to herself as if there's self-soothing incantations, little fragments like journey's end in lover's meeting. She retreats into introspective fantasies about cottages and cups of stars and tiny beautiful domestic lives, and the repetition traps both Eleanor and the reader inside her inner world. Even Hill House itself becomes repetitive. The endless corridors, the circular rooms, the doors that refuse to stay open. Shirley Jackson keeps returning to the same physical details until the house stops feeling like a setting and starts feeling like a psychological state. Another thing Shirley Jackson does brilliantly is that she almost never fully explains what's happening. Like in Hill House, you're constantly asking, is the house actually haunted or is Eleanor just losing it? Are the supernatural events even real? And Jackson never fully resolves that ambiguity, which is exactly why the novel lingers in your brain afterwards, because uncertainty creates anxiety. Readers keep searching for stable reality, but Shirley Jackson never fully gives it to them. She pushes this even further in Hangs a Man. I read Hangs a Man over 10 years ago and I still think about it all the time. It is basically my Roman Empire. In Hangs a Man, the boundaries between reality and imagination become increasingly unstable as Natalie becomes more psychologically isolated. Conversations feel fragmented, characters feel unreal, and the deeper that Natalie retreats into herself, the less solid the outside world begins to feel. The dread comes from disorientation. You start losing your own sense of certainty alongside the character. Jackson's settings never feel like passive backgrounds either. They feel emotionally active. Hill House feels like loneliness made physical. The Blackwood house feels both protective and imprisoning. And in the Sundial, the wealthy, crumbling household becomes this bizarre, enclosed world where delusion slowly replaces reality. The characters isolate themselves while preparing for the apocalypse. And what's fascinating is how absurdity gradually becomes normalised. Everybody keeps reinforcing each other's distorted worldview until the social structure itself becomes detached from reality. It's very on brand for Shirley Jackson, people creating elaborate emotional systems in order to avoid confronting the outside world. And even though the Sundial is genuinely funny in places, there's still this growing atmosphere of claustrophobia and instability underneath everything. And that's something people don't talk about enough, is that Shirley Jackson is genuinely hilarious. Like painfully observant in a way that makes you feel attacked. She notices every awkward social interaction, every tiny humiliation, every passive-aggressive comment. There's this incredibly sharp social comedy running underneath all the horror. And I think that humour matters because life isn't usually just non-stop horror. There's lulls in there as well. Her writing always feels real and authentic in a way that makes other fiction feel like it's trying too hard. It feels neat and sanitised in comparison. When you read Shirley Jackson now, you can see her influence absolutely everywhere. I mean, she didn't exactly invent the haunted house novel, but she perfected it in a way that makes everything that came after it seem derivative. You can absolutely see traces of her influence in writers like Otessa Moshfegh and Mona Awad and so much other weird girl lit, like socially alienated narrators, feminine rage, uncanny domestic spaces, women withdrawing from society, psychological instability, all mixed with dark humour. I think the greatest writers are able to articulate emotional experiences that most people struggle to explain about themselves. And that's what Shirley Jackson does better than anyone I've ever read. She understands the feeling of being disconnected from the world around you in this incredibly precise and compassionate way. The feeling that everybody else has received some invisible instruction manual for being a person that you somehow missed. The feeling of watching social interaction happen around you while feeling separate from it or outside of it. And that's what makes Shirley Jackson extraordinary. It's that she doesn't treat these feelings as melodramatic or embarrassing. She just treats them as deeply human. Her characters often feel lonely and socially misaligned and psychologically isolated, but she writes them with so much intelligence and emotional specificity that you feel understood rather than judged. And I think that's why so many people become intensely attached to her work, because reading Shirley Jackson can feel strangely cathartic. It's like someone has finally articulated an emotional reality you thought only existed inside your own head, especially for people who have always felt slightly out of step with the world and more comfortable in imagination than in ordinary life. Jackson takes those feelings and she transforms them into literature that feels haunting and beautiful and deeply validating all at once. That's why her books stay with people. It's not because they're frightening, it's because they make people feel seen. There are other authors that I admire and other authors that I love, but Shirley Jackson is one of the very few writers who makes me feel profoundly understood. So yes, I genuinely do think that Shirley Jackson is the greatest writer of all time. If you've never read Shirley Jackson before, I'd start with We've Always Lived in the Castle, The Haunting of Hill House, or The Lottery and Other Stories, depending on whether you want unsettling women, unsettling houses, or unsettling communities. And if you have read Shirley Jackson, I'd love to know which of her works affected you the most, because I really think that she's one of those authors people carry with them forever. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, you know what to do. And if you want to join me for more Weird Girl Wednesdays, you know what to do as well. Until next time, stay strange and happy reading. Shirley Jackson. We owe her a lot.